And this podcast is slightly different to the previous podcasts in as much as I'm not talking about stories of things I've managed to get up to from time to time. But I wanted to talk about the basic underlying philosophy of the Creative Photography Academy and the way I teach photography, and that is to encourage people to not be photographers but to be visual storytellers. And I thought it was worth saying a little bit about what the philosophy is behind that approach. So the first thing is that there are a lot of simple mistakes that a lot of photographers make. Quite often they will get fixated by a subject and not look at what's happening around it. So this is where the classic tree growing out of somebody's head or a telegraph pole or whatever it is, where that comes from. Or they don't take any notice of the background. So they get, again, so fixated on the subject that they're not looking at what's going on around them. So this is where you've got maybe a great family portrait in a park and there's a couple of dogs mating in the background or something ridiculous like that. So what people tend to do is to get fixated on one thing through the viewfinder or on their LCD screen, if they're on the phone or on a mirrorless camera, and they forget to look at the rest of the frame. What else is in that picture? What else is going on there? And they don't think about either what the outcome is they want. So sometimes I will shoot a photograph and I know that I don't want it in color. Obviously we see in color, so that's what we see when we're looking through a viewfinder. Now I'm sure with some of the LCDs I don't have it, but I'm pretty sure you can flip them to black and white so you can see the black and white image before you shoot it. I come from the days of film where we didn't do that. We had to imagine it. And that means that we had to learn how to visualize the final image before we press the shutter button. And I think in doing that, it's a very good discipline to have because it allows you to move very quickly when it comes time to taking a photograph. You can take the shot very quickly, but also you can set it up knowing that there are certain things you want to do in post-processing. And post-processing is something that most people do these days. Most of the image, well, pretty much any image that I post anywhere has been post-processed. I know some people have a concern about whether or not that is ethical. My first answer to that is that whether or not it's ethical is up to you. If you intend it to be ethical, then it probably is. And if you intend it to not be ethical, then it definitely won't be. Secondly, you have to remember that what the camera sees and what gets recorded on the memory card inside the camera or even on the film is not the same as what you see with your eye-brain combination. We have very sophisticated visual systems built in, if you like, and we compensate automatically for low light, for a whole range of things. And a camera doesn't have that level of sophistication. So quite often you'll shoot something, I'm thinking sunsets here as a classic case in point, something that looks absolutely amazing. But when you look at the photographs, it's just totally different. They have no depth to them. They're very flat images. And it's simply down to the way the electronics are working as opposed to what's happening between our eyes and our brain. So that's one reason to post-process. Coming back to visualizing the shot, if you intend to do something with it from a post-processing perspective, you can see all of that. Once you get a bit of experience, you can begin to see all of that before you hit the shutter button. And some of that comes from knowing the package. So I don't push any particular post-processing package. I happen to use Photoshop, but only because I know how to use it. It is a very powerful piece of software, but there are certainly others as well that are very good. And because I've used Photoshop a lot now, I know what I want to do with it. I know what I can get it to do to create a particular image I want. Now, having said all of that, for a typical image, I won't spend more than about 2 minutes post-processing it. So I'm not somebody who's spending hours and hours setting up a particular picture. I know there are people who do that, and there are certain disciplines, certain types of macro photography where you shoot these very thin slices that are in focus and then you put them together, or astrophotography where you sort of stack up shots to get an overall effect. There are certainly disciplines within photography where you would use multiple exposures, where you would expect to do a lot of post-processing. But for what I do very little. As I said, I rarely spend more than 2 minutes on a particular image. So that all comes down to visualizing the final image. And that coming back to this idea of the visual storyteller. It comes back to knowing what the story is that you're trying to tell. Now, the other reason I think visual storytelling is very important is that we are natural storytellers, human beings. We tell stories. If you look at how popular Hollywood is, how popular TV is, soap operas, all of this kind of stuff, and it's very easy to get drawn in because we just love stories. It's wired into our DNA. So, as a photographer, I mean, this particularly goes for any kind of art form, but definitely as a photographer, you want to be telling a story. And how do you do that with a single image? You could it's easier over several images because you kind of build up a narrative as you go. But if you think about some of these iconic photojournalism photographs, and I'm sure you've got your own. I'm not going to mention any particularly here, but there are so many to choose from. What is it about that particular photograph that appeals to you? How do you feel connected to it? And the chances are you've made an emotional connection to it. That's why you feel strongly. And there are things you can do in photography that will allow you to heighten the emotional feel of a particular image. So the first part of that process is to visualize the overall image, the final image that you're trying to shoot, then to photograph it to make sure your camera is exposing correctly, that you've got the kind of raw data, as it were, to work on, and then you pop it into post-processing and you do the final adjustments and final tweaking there. And then the fourth part of the process, I tend to teach a 4-part process. So the first part is imagining the picture, if you like, seeing the final picture, but imagining and looking at what's really there. So it comes down to observation and imagination working together. The second part is actually taking the photograph. So that requires a certain level of understanding of your camera. The third part is post-processing. So as I've already said, you need to have at least a working understanding of what you can do with the package that you're using so that you know what the possibilities are for a particular shot. And then the final thing is the emotional connection with the image. And that might well vary from person to person. So in a single image I shoot, it might mean something to me. When somebody else looks at it, it might mean something completely different. And this again is where it stops becoming a discipline as such, and it becomes an art form. It becomes subjective. People will like different things about your work. Some people won't like your work because they don't get it, or their life experience doesn't align with your life experience and the story that you see or that you saw when you took the shot, and the story that you're trying to put across. So all of these are elements of the visual storyteller idea, but I think the strongest is to just getting down to basics, getting down to actually using the camera. It makes you really look at what's in the viewfinder. Then start thinking about composition. Do you want your subject in the middle? Do you want it off to one side? How do you create a feeling of time or a feeling of movement? And you can do that by using space in the photograph. So and what I mean by that is basically the part of the frame that doesn't include the subject. What else is there? Can you use other elements? Here I'm thinking about things like trees or lampposts or the line of a pavement to create leading lines, which take the viewer on a journey through the photograph. One definition I love and I often mention, or I keep forgetting who said it, is that the definition of a good photograph is basically the longer somebody spends looking at it, the better it is. And I just love that as an idea. So one of the little tricks you can do is not shoot everything square, just tilt your camera very slightly, particularly if you've got horizontal or vertical lines, patterns of horizontal or vertical lines in your photograph. By putting them off, just tilting the camera very slightly so they're no longer square, you immediately make that a more interesting photograph. And I think part of that as well is shooting from a viewpoint that people don't normally have. So what I mean by that is that most photographs I see are shot by people at normal eye level. They just stand there, they hold the camera up to their face and they shoot what they see. So that's fine, but that's what everybody else sees pretty much. Unless you're extremely tall or extremely short, that's what what you're shooting is pretty much the same as what everybody else sees. So another great thing to do to get people's attention is to shoot a subject they may well be very familiar with, but shoot it from a different angle. Either get down very low or go up high somewhere and shoot down on it. Now, when I was living in Sydney, I used to really enjoy doing photo walks, and I used to do that with We're Observers, with Shane Rosario and Colin Winter Seaton. Mostly Colin and I would do it towards the end, but I really enjoyed doing those. But we would vary the routes we took around Sydney. We'd meet at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Circular Quay, if you know Circular Quay in Sydney, and then we would head off sometimes to the Rocks. Sometimes we'd go over the other side to the Harbour Bridge. Or sometimes we'd stay in that area and just work up towards the where the bars were and everything. The thing about it is, for the people who are coming on the walks, a lot of them it was all new and they're learning new things, so it was interesting. But for us who were doing it every 2 weeks, we'd run them fortnightly. I would sometimes just not be inspired. So the thing I used to do is just put my camera down on the ground and take a photograph. Now, often it wasn't particularly good, but the thing about it is I was getting a different viewpoint, and just looking at that photograph would inevitably give me some idea. And then I would start thinking about how to frame things differently, how to just choose a different angle, and in turn show that to people, particularly people who would come along regularly, because they would have heard what we were doing. They would have heard it all before. We would set a challenge for the walk, and it might be to find circles and squares, or find contrasts, or leading lines, or whatever it might be. And that added another dimension to doing those walks. So again, when you're thinking about your photography, if you want to start creating photographs that stand out, think about your viewpoint. And another thing to do is to take a photograph of something and then change your viewpoint, and then change it again and change it again. Try and do it 5, 6, 7, 8 times, whatever it takes, to get a number of different perspectives of that same subject. Because again, what tends to happen is you try one idea, or if you get down really low and shoot it, or get up high and shoot down on it, or even get in really close and take a detailed shot of it. Maybe I'm looking at a tree now as I speak, so maybe get in and do a very close-up view of the texture of the bark, and then flip that to a black and white. Black and white is all about shapes and textures, so just doing that can give you a completely different take on something that you might look at every day. Or look at little growths that are there on a tree and photograph those, go into real detail. Look at what's on the tree. There might be insects living there. So the point about it is that if you start giving yourself, I guess habitually, a range of different ways to shoot the same subject, you almost can't avoid but inspire yourself by shooting one thing many different ways, and then you might get ideas for the next thing you come across. It just gets you to see what's around you in a different way. And that comes back to, again, the visual storytelling. One of the key concepts underneath We're Observers that Shane Rosario came up with was that to be a good photographer, you're an observer first. And an observer is essentially a photographer without a camera. So a good photographer will really see what's around them, see the detail. And you only see that by stopping and looking and thinking about it. But you will see things that are there that other people in the same place, they just won't see them. It might be the detail in an iron railing, or it could be the way a shadow falls across something at a certain time of day. There are so many things once you start opening up and exploring that. So observation is absolutely key. And again, as a storyteller, be the visual storyteller of places that other people go to regularly, places they maybe go most days, and yet you're telling them the story of something that they didn't even know was there, even though they may have walked past it hundreds or thousands of times. So again, a good deal of storytelling is observation. because if you can't see it, you can't photograph it, you can't then tell the story to other people. Once you have seen it, the thing then to do is how are you looking at it? How can you get somebody else to see this thing in a different way, even though they may have seen it, as I've said, every day, or it's something they might see most days of their life. So do try with different angles, try with getting in close, far away, wide angles. Use the characteristics of lenses that you have available. So wide angles will tend to, as you go wider, they'll tend to distort the image. So things that are that are closer to the camera lens appear much closer. Things that are further away go further away. So you get that depth distortion by using a wide angle lens, and you get the exact opposite with the telephoto lens. You get it compresses perspective. And what I mean by that, if you've ever seen an athletics event, that's the one I remember from when I was young. If you're watching let's say a long distance race and they're taking a shot right down the straight, it's when the guy leading comes around the curve and then starts running down the straight, and then a few seconds later somebody else appears around the curve and starts running behind the first person. With a very long lens, very long telephoto, it will look like that the second person is right behind the first person, even though there was a delay of a few seconds before they appeared. Whereas if you saw that same view from side on, you'll realize that second person is quite a long way back. But because you're using a telephoto, it tends to bring things that are far away much closer. And obviously that's why we use a long focal length lens to see things that are further away but bring them much closer. And that's a way that the perspective, if you like, between the two people, the two objects, whatever it is, becomes compressed when you use a telephoto. So a lot of this experimentation is getting familiar with the equipment you've got, but using it in a very creative way, thinking about it from the perspective of showing something in a way that it wouldn't normally be seen. Now, another thing that I think is really important, and I guess I'll finish on this, is just understanding your camera, because cameras these days are really good. They will do a lot of work for you. They'll do a lot of the calculations for you. They'll do, do an awful lot to get the right exposure for you and all these things that are really important. And I know a lot of people get quite intimidated by all of the menu pages and things that are on them. Now, I will admit, although I've been through all of the menu pages on my cameras, I couldn't immediately remember how to find things, if I'm totally honest. I don't look at the menus very often, except one or two things that I might want to check regularly. It might be how my batteries are doing, that kind of thing. The thing I am very on top of, though, are the modes of the camera. And what I mean by that is that fully auto is one mode, fully manual is another one. And then cameras, pretty much every camera I've come across, have some others in between, maybe 2 or 3 other options in between. So it's good to get an idea of what those give you, the options you have on your camera, understand what they are and what level of automation that you have. Because if you start with fully auto, which I know is how a lot of people like to use their camera, the camera does absolutely everything for you, but the creative control you have is very limited. If you go to fully manual, the camera does almost nothing for you, but you've got full creative control. Now, for most people, you want to be somewhere between those two extremes. So that's why I say start to learn the modes, find which ones work for you, and then when you use them, the camera is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and you can focus on your shot, on the creative aspects of your photography, and telling that story, and being cognizant, thinking about the story that you want to tell and why you're interested in shooting that particular subject. So that's pretty much it. Slightly different to the normal podcast, but I hope you find that interesting. If you want to know more, just go to www.creativephotographyacademy.com, and this is the underlying philosophy for the 2 online photography courses I have, one for smartphone, one for DSLR and mirrorless, and you'll find more information about them on the website. So thanks for your time, and I'll speak to you at some point in the future. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.